and I would like to do that. Perhaps that part is missing. I acknowledge that, and yet at the same time I would say that because this would have also taken taken much more energy than I wanted to invest on that question as part of my research, because my research I wanted to go further and begin engaging with people like Vivekananda, and at some point I had to make a choice to take their understanding of religion and Hinduism to engage with. And that's why perhaps it gives an impression that there is not sufficient space given to that. So I take it positively. Thank you.
Professor Longkum, with your permission, I would like to move to the next opponent. Perhaps there is time at the end, and then we will come back to you. Professor Julesny, can I invite you to continue the opposition?
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. Thank you to the candidate for this important work, and I really enjoyed it and learned a lot from it. I wanted to ask about ecofeminism, as this comes up in the thesis, in the dissertation. So the candidate seems to reject any sense of special suffering of women from ecological degradation. So for example, on page 109, the candidate argues that natural disasters affect men as much as they do women. My impression is that this would not be denied by most ecofeminists, but that the point that ecofeminists wish to emphasize is the special vulnerability of women and children and the natural world, given the extensive reach and impact of patriarchy. In most contexts, women and children have significantly less power to shape their destiny and well-being compared to men, and are therefore more vulnerable than men to forms of suffering, especially ecological in this case. So I wondered if you could say more about why you make this argument in the thesis, and how important it is to your argument, and if you think it's important to acknowledge some of these special vulnerabilities of women and children. Thank you.
Thank you, highly learned opponent, for this, once again, a very relevant, pertinent question that you've asked. Indeed, what you just said about women and children being more vulnerable to nature, indeed, to natural calamities, for example, indeed, that is the case. What I have argued against in my book is not necessarily as at ecofeminism at large, but what I have seen and what I have pointed out with the use of several resources and with use of several data, that to the abuse of or certain assumptions that are taken for granted, particularly in Indian case. So for instance, I have pointed out that that it is often assumed that when it comes to ecological degradation, women are the first one to voice their concern. Now, there is a particular example that I have mentioned in footnote, which is that if there is a context where women are given leadership to take care, expecting that they would take care of environment better, there were instances in India where there was a conflict between caste identity and identity as a woman, or as a woman, and surprisingly, the caste identity takes precedence over feminist identity. And in such cases, the assumption that women has natural empathy for nature and therefore they're ecologically more concerned becomes questionable in examples like that. And when I took this look at this example, the argument was taken from that particular example and the assumption that lies behind it. So I in no way deny. In fact, in my research, I have taken ecofeminist insights on the birth of nature and the birth that women, the childbirth in women and the similarity between that. I've taken that as a very positive theme that is parallel between women's experience and experience of nature. A groaning of nature is very similar to the experience that women go through in childbirth. So I have taken them very positively, but I have just also pointed out the underlying assumptions that are questionable in such arguments, yeah.
Professor, would you like to briefly follow up or are you satisfied with the answer?
I'm very satisfied with that response. Thank you.
Very much. Then the opposition will be continued by Professor Nodge.
Thank you so much for offering us a mirror through this book in a tension around practicing contextual theology. I've well received your intention to make this book, this project, a exercise in contextual theology, and my question resonates already part of the discussions you had with Professor Loncomer, but then on another notion, namely on the notion of science. On page 33 of your dissertation, you give a working definition of the word science, and with this background of the intention of doing a contextual theology exercise, you right away say that you define science as the German word Wissenschaft defines it. So this, of course, brings me into this tension, like, what would happen if you define your term, your work definition you offer with other sources than the sources given by you, namely Sven Ove Hansen from Sweden, or later in chapter 6, other so-called Western sources. So my question resonates the title of an Indian scholar, Sundar Sarukai. What is science after this project you completed?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for asking, highly learned opponent. Thank you for asking this relevant question again. It's a question that has been, that I encountered in the beginning of my research, and it stayed with me throughout the research. All the more because during my research, I explored the Indian way of approaching science, Indian way of looking at nature. And as a result, one of my thesis statements is that nature is one, but sciences are plural. So that's how I look at science at the end of this project. I looked at there are traditions that have that are scientific in the sense that they are trying to create a systematic knowledge of the object that they are looking at. And in my opinion, at this, while having done this research, I feel that I continue to adhere to that idea that sciences are plural. That is precisely because our approach to nature are socially and culturally located. We look to nature only from within our lenses provided to us by our culture, by our social landscape. And as a result, we come to nature with the questions that are given to us in that sense. And we begin to explore nature or do science as we try to gather and systematically gather knowledge. So for me, any attempt to gather knowledge systematically and put them together is science, and therefore it is also a very broad definition of science. An interesting case in example is the whole tradition of astrology in India, which the differentiation between astrology and astronomy is fairly recent, and so astrology was also looked at as scientific, and it was an attempt to gather knowledge and systematize it. So for me, science remains any attempt to systematically gather knowledge about an object.
Would you like to briefly follow up on this, Professor Nodge?
Yes, thank you. I see and hear the post-colonial or decolonial intention of working with this notion of science, also in your first thesis. Yet, let me just invite you to give us a little more reflection on it, because in chapter 6, you do not end or you do not finish with this idea of science is plural, but you quote once again these so-called Western, and I use the notion Western according to your own definition, these Western scholars, tons and numbers, with the provocative title, you distinguish between science, pseudo-science, and science falsely. So then that brings me back again to the idea of contextual building towards a contextual idea of understanding of science, which perhaps goes beyond these modern categories where the truth claim is so central to.
Highly learned opponent, thank you for this follow-up question. I do believe, as I said, that my definition and understanding of science is influenced by post-colonial and post-modern approaches, including the works of Sandra Harding, who asked the difficult question, who's science? And therefore, there are multiple sciences. I continue to adhere to that position that there are multiple sciences. Towards the chapter 6, when I have begun to talk about science, I do also use it as in modern science, where the question of truth claim has become central precisely because although there are sciences, there is a continuous conversation between sciences going on, and one of the points that I make in my research is that from the point of modern science, there are also pseudosciences. Now, how do we define what is science and what is pseudoscience? Once again, that's a continuous conversation. There are arguments that pseudosciences themselves are a recent phenomenon where certain notions which or failed versions of science are branded as or regarded as pseudoscience. And while this conversation is going on, I have also pointed out that even though I myself believe that there are many versions of science, my discussion goes in particular conversation with modern science and the assumptions that are underlying modern science. And my dialogue partner, therefore, in that particular case becomes modern science. And this is very clear when I look at chapter 3 on interreligious dialogue. Once again, the landscape is modern. Once again, the assumption that Hindu theologians and Hindu thinkers have is that there is one modern science, and Hindu theologians, Hindu thinkers begin to align themselves and engage in dialogue with this particular modern science. And so likewise Christians, when they talk about science, they do look at this particular modern science. And therefore, because of these constraints placed by my interlocutors, my dialogue partner there is modern science, and therefore I use the framework provided by modern science. That once again, the discussion, if I were to use the different versions of science, if that were to be an argument, perhaps I would not be able to make the headways into the argumentation as I have made in this research. And therefore, for the purpose of the research, for the aim and objective, I had deliberately chosen to look into the dialogue that is already going on between Hindu voices, Christian voices, and modern science, and therefore the limitations. I hope this helps clarify the position a little bit.
Professor Nudge, with your permission, I would like to give the floor to the next opponent, Professor Wisse.
Dear candidate, first of all, I would like to congratulate you wholeheartedly with the defense of this dissertation. It is a work that has a very broad scope, very scholarly approach to strikingly different fields, and makes an innovative proposal by combining these fields to something new. Excellent. But I'm here to ask questions this afternoon. So my first question, you go along with Colin Gunton for your Trinitarian theology of creation quite a long way. In the end, you criticize him for putting too much emphasis on otherness in the Trinity. According to you, this is problematic in view of the otherization occurring in a post-colonial Indian context. Instead, you propose a model in which the person of Christ is the model for our view of matter. You see that, among other reasons, as a means for overcoming the otherization that occurs in Gunton's thought. Now, my question is, do you not turn matter into something divine, which has some distinction within God, but is fundamentally in the same category as God. So if distinguishing between God and the world in Christian theology is a matter of keeping a balance, a delicate balance, could one not say that what you do countering Gunton's authorization problem is on the other side making it difficult to really strongly say that matter is not God?
Highly learned opponent, thank you again for asking this very pertinent, relevant, and a question that I have struggled with myself. It's a question that I would like to explore this as a journey. So when I began to read Gunton's work, Gunton was my window into Trinitarian thought. And when I looked at him, I realized that there are very important threads of argument that are similar to what I would like to say. And as you rightly mentioned, I do go along with Gunton quite a long way, and then part my ways at a certain point. Now there are particularly the point of otherization, and I feel that if in the post-colonial framework, the notion of otherization is problematic, because for the post-colonial thinking, otherization always leads to domination and exploitation. So the notion of otherization is problematic. I have, however, pointed out also with the use of creatio ex nihilo, that I continue to maintain that as an important contribution of Christian theology. I think that my turn away from Gunton is not a complete turn away in the sense that I rejected his ideas. I do continue to take the notion of distinction between God and world from his theology, and once again by emphasizing creatio ex nihilo, where God makes himself distinct from the natural world, or both of them have a distinct identity so that they can relate. I continue to take that. When I turn to incarnation, what I am suggesting is that my turn towards incarnation I look at it as something that balances Gunton's view. What as a result of an intercultural theological approach, my notion of relationality actually suggests that there is a distinction required between God and the world, but there is also a strong connection required between God and the world. I often use this example that, and this is where I get my argument to critique Gunton from. I use often this example of a cultural diversity. For many Westerners, when they see in Western countries, often when a child is born, the parents are preparing for the child. They make a separate room for the child. They buy a separate bed for the child, because child is considered a distinct personality with whom you can engage. This is very strange to many Indians. Like, why would you do that? And it's the other way around. Probably for many Westerners, it would be strange that Indian kids are sleeping in their parents' bedroom till they are 8 or 10. This would be very strange, because the notion that children can have a distinct identity and their individual being is something not so easily identifiable, recognizable. And I feel that Gunton also perhaps suffers from this cultural tendency in which he is writing. And therefore, he looks at relationship as something like two distinct persons engaging with each other, the spirit and the son. In Indian context, we have the temptation of not recognizing enough distinction between God and the world, and therefore that is why I differ from eco-theology and ecofeminism, where sometimes where the relationship between God and the world is too fused together, where there is no distinction. And what I am arguing in my research is that we need to avoid both these extremes, and true relationality is both where distinction is recognized, where otherization is recognized, and where connections are recognized. And to do justice to that, I turn to Trinitarian approach, which takes Gunton and ecofeminist longings both together, and eco-theology's longing together, of connections and distinctions together. That is what I was aiming at.
Can I still? So when I understand you correctly, your hesitation about the authorization in Ganten is not like a kind of fundamental full-scale hesitation, but so you accept some kind of otherness within the Trinity.
Certainly. Thank you for asking that follow-up question. Yes, certainly. I do think that distinction between God and the natural world are extremely important. And in my earlier chapter on science in liberative discourses, I have pointed out that when nature and God are fused together, they can be exploitative. Generally, our impression is that when God, and that's precisely because it's a Western experience, when God is pushed out of nature and there is no, the relationship is something where God is pushed out of nature, and therefore in the West we experience the temptation of atheism, where God is not there, he's pushed out of nature, or deism, whereas in India we experience something opposite, where God is too fused into nature, and therefore there are Dalit voices within India who are crying out for, or who are asking that God be pushed out of nature, because God is so fused, said that you are not able to study nature, investigate nature, because nature is God. God lives in nature. And therefore, the point that I am making is that too much of fusing of God and nature together can be as exploitative as distinction between God and nature. And therefore, we need both these approaches where God is connected with nature, but God is also distinct from nature. And I believe that Trinitarian framework provides that middle ground from where you can argue that God is distinct from nature and God is still one with nature through the incarnation. I hope
Thank
that
you.
answers the question.
The doctoral board has heard your defense and will withdraw to deliberate. But before I suspend the session, I would like to compliment you on your concentration despite all the hiccups. The session is suspended. The session is resumed. Mr. PhD candidate, the doctoral board has reviewed your dissertation and has heard your defense. The board has decided to award you the doctorate. Please be seated. I now invite Professor Benno van der Toren to confer this dignity upon you in the customary manner.
By virtue of the authority granted to us by law, and according to the decision of the doctoral committee present here, I hereby declare you, Charles Samuel Christian, to be promoted to doctor, with all rights and responsibilities attached thereto by law and tradition with respect to science, church, and society. As proof of this, I hand you the diploma signed by the rector and promoter and sealed with the Great Seal of the university. Esteemed Dr. Christian, dear Charles, it's a great joy that I'm given the opportunity to congratulate you with your thesis and with your newly acquired title, both for myself and for the second promoter, Professor Paul van der Velde. I first heard about you through one of the scholar mentors of the Langham Partnership. He told me that they were in touch with a gifted young theologian from North India, whom they would like to support and who would like to work in the area of science and religion in the context of India. Would I be willing to supervise this candidate? That they actively sought to attract you into their doctoral scholarship program tells something about the promise they saw in you. They had seen your gifts as a lecturer, as editor for a journal and publishing house, and as a state coordinator for the Evangelical Fellowship of India. In the light of our research in science and religion in French-speaking Africa, Klaas Boom and I were increasingly convinced of the importance of cultural and social contexts for understanding and deepening the science and religion debate. This was a great opportunity to explore that insight further in a different context. And I'm grateful that Professor Paul van der Velde was willing to become a part of the supervisory team, given his extensive and deep knowledge of the religious contexts in South Asia. We first worked together for a period of 3 months in a sort of personal initial graduate school, during which you prepared your research proposal. During that time, I discovered your ability to shape your own project and your skillful writing, about which Langham had already informed me. Sometime later, you came to live in Groningen with your wife Jacqueline and with Anaya and Hanan. It was a joy that your family spent the first months in the Netherlands living at the top floor of our house, so that we could all come to know you well. From the get-go, you were not only interested in academic opportunities in the Netherlands, but wanted to get acquainted with various aspects of Dutch culture, such as the bakfiets or the avondvierdaagse. I want to use this opportunity to also thank Jacqueline for the sacrifices she's given you and the support she's given you during these years of support for you and for your research project. Particularly because returning to student life in your 30s is not the expected life journey of the upcoming Gujarati middle class. Charles' final proposition is formulated as doing a PhD while parenting is hard, parenting while doing a PhD is harder. This shows the seriousness with which you have taken your family responsibilities. Yet, knowing Charles, I think you could also have written, doing a PhD while parenting is a joy. Parenting while doing a PhD is even more so. In these years of study, you've given an outstanding proof of your ability to do independent research. Your project shows that you have contributed to the development of an Indian theology of the material world that is embedded in India's post-colonial context, interreligious discourse, and the search for liberation of the oppressed. With your Trinitarian theology of the material world, focusing on Jesus Christ as the God body, you have not only contributed to the development of a theology of materiality for your own context, you also contributed to Western theological discourse that is still grappling with the need to engage with a global context characterized by religious pluralism and systemic injustice. I believe that the importance of this thesis surpasses this particular theme you have addressed. You also contributed to the development of the deepening of the methodology of interreligious and intercultural theology. You have shown, as others have done, that such interreligious and intercultural engagement does demand that we take cultural contexts, social factors, and power dynamics with utter seriousness. But you've also shown that we need to be equally serious about the implicit and explicit ontological claims the different voices make and that drive the conversation forward. And I've been impressed by your ability to take these different dimensions of the conversation all into account. I'm grateful and proud that our working relationship over the last years will continue in your new role as postdoctoral researcher in the project Church from the Future, and as a theological educator in your former seminary in Udaipur with the GZB, or Reformed Mission League. That role will allow you to serve young churches in North India in a context in which many of your students are first-generation Christians. Interreligious and intercultural engagement will remain a continuous thread throughout your teaching. And I also look forward how the cultural engagement between North India and the Netherlands will help theology and the church in the Netherlands to deepen our confidence in the meaning of Christ in today's world. In this laudatio, I want to laud and thank you for the way your research and your ministry are an intercultural gift to theology, to the church, in these two very different contexts.
Most learned sir, also on behalf of the doctoral board, I congratulate you on the dignity you have obtained. I now invite you to sign the book. Or the album. I will now conclude this session with the doxology. I ask all of you to rise. The Almighty God, by whose light we see light, to him be the glory forever and ever, through Jesus Christ. Amen.